Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm having a chat here tonight. Be with you in a minute. I need to share to a few places first. Thank you. Hi there, Evelina. Be with you in a minute. Okay, thank you all for sharing. And hello, Evelina. Hello, Steve. And Kay Ryan, how are you? And also, Dolores Pierce, welcome to you. And thank you all for sharing. And thank you for the Purple Heart, Dolores. That must mean you've been active in the wars today. So, prisoners of risk. What do I mean by prisoners of risk? Hmm. Excuse that little red mark on my forehead. This evening, I was at a grocery store today and I reached up to get some fennel off the shelf. It was towards the rear and on the top, and I figured the best fennel would be there. And I knocked the container off, and as it fell, it hit me on the forehead and left a little cut there. Isn't anything serious. It didn't actually hurt, but I guess it bit a little bit, or stung a little bit. So, and the title of my stream tonight, of course, refers to the new period in the history of the Middle Eastern conflict that is now upon us. Now we can see now clearly that the origins of the situation we're in now, hi Jeffrey Denton, really occurred when Trump came to the presidency and withdrew from the arms control treaty with the Europeans, okay, and Iran. The treaty that Iran was, according to all accounts, complying with, whose purpose was to prevent Iran from going the whole way in developing had nuclear weapons that it sought. And so, since that time, in other words, after basically tearing up the treaty, at least from the point of view of the United States, which, by the way, shows you how easy it is to get out of a treaty if the President of the United States would like to get us out of a treaty, a certain kind, okay, of treaty anyway. So don't let me hear anybody say in the future that the President of the United States cannot withdraw us from a treaty. For example, if there happens to be a trade treaty that Trump concludes now, would it be impossible for Bernie Sanders to rip it up? I don't think so. I think the President of the United States is able to withdraw us from treaties, really pretty much at will. Okay, as Trump showed with this arms control treaty, okay, with Iran. So keeping that in mind, he not only basically tore up the treaty from our point of view, but he left the following situation. One of the conditions for conclusion of the treaty was that the regime of economic sanctions that Iran was suffering under would end. The economic sanctions had been very harsh for Iran, and its population was suffering under it. It was beginning to become increasingly difficult for them to get the medicines they needed for people. The economy was in a stagnating state, and that's because the sanctions were never really lifted. And when Trump withdrew from the treaty and then imposed even harsher sanctions, even harsher sanctions on Iran, even though the Europeans insisted that they were still parties to the treaty, they failed to break off the sanctions. That is, not wanting to antagonize the United States. They still followed the sanctions policies for the most part. Okay, so Iran wasn't gaining any advantage from the treaty. Even so, it continued to comply with the treaty for a year or more. In fact, even today, it's still been largely complying with the treaty. Though now, since the assassination of Soleiman, it has basically suspended the treaty. He still hasn't ended the treaty, but it has said that okay, it is going to go ahead with the development, okay, of its weapons, but has also basically said that it still thinks the treaty, okay, is valid, and it will return to compliance with the treaty when the other parties return to compliance with the treaty, okay, including the United States, of course. Okay, so Iran has indicated that it stands willing to go back to the treaty. However, by increasing the severity of the sanctions, what Trump actually created was a situation where the Iranians would take various hostile actions in response to the actions of the United States, whereupon we would then take certain retaliatory actions involving airstrikes within Iraq. And we would make these airstrikes, but sometimes, okay, on U.S. personnel in Iraq, and sometimes on the Shia militias, okay, within Iraq, that were viewed by the United States as allied with Iran. So we have had now an escalation going on for some months. For some months actually within Iraq. Within the last 2 weeks or so, we have increased the intensity of our airstrikes. Okay, so the militias then backed an action by popular forces in Iran, which were becoming increasingly upset. I should say popular forces, okay, in Iraq, which were had been becoming increasingly upset over the emergence of a conflict between Iran and Iraq. Okay, I'm sorry. With a conflict essentially between Iran and the United States, using Iraq as the battlefield. They saw this as the major thing that was going on. So the popular forces that were in favor of both the withdrawal of the Iranians and also the withdrawal of the United States, that is what led to the attack on the embassy, which was perceived by the Trump administration as a very serious escalation, which it apparently blamed on Iran, or anyway intended uh, to place such a blame on Iran so that it would have an excuse to escalate further. At this point, we don't exactly know which of these two things was the case. However, in any case, the assassination, the murder of by Soleiman, uh, and also the head, okay, of a major Shia militia that was carried out through our drone strike, was initiated by the United States as a retaliation. We were retaliating supposedly for the attack on the embassy, and also supposedly for various attacks, okay, by Iranian allied forces inside of Iraq, okay, on U.S. forces there, okay, and U.S. allies there, that had been going on for months, and that we claimed were due to the planning, okay, and the tactical moves of Soleiman. We could not really prove this, at least there's not a lot of concrete evidence that has come out of the intelligence community so far to show this was the case. And in any case, the intelligence community lies to us all the time anyway. So we really don't know whether that was the case or not, but our government was blaming the escalations on the Iranian side, was blaming them on Soleiman. He was the planner. He was behind it all. And he was collaborating with the Shia militias in order to create all this trouble for ourselves and our allies in Iraq. So this was the justification, and there was also a further justification that Soleiman was planning even bigger and more severe attacks within the coming months that were going to result in a horrendous escalation of the war, and that in order to stop that, we had to take the basically preventive measure, okay, of essentially murdering Suleiman and the major Shia leader that he was with. Now, it turns out that Suleiman was on a diplomatic mission, actually, to Iraq. He was there to receive an offer from the Saudis to de-escalate the conflict between Iran and the Saudis in the Middle East. He was there to receive the offer, he was there to consider the offer, and then presumably he was there to carry it back to the Ayatollahs, okay, and to the government, okay, of Iran. So that's the story. That's the story. He was there on a diplomatic mission. So the United States basically decided to murder someone who was conducting diplomacy on a trip invited by the prime minister, okay, of Iraq. The acting prime minister, yes, but still the prime minister who was attempting to broker a solution to the conflict, or at least a de escalation of the conflict between the Saudis and Iran. So here we go. We have killed a diplomat. We've now encountered a very strong reaction from the parliament, okay, in Iraq, which has passed a resolution demanding we withdraw from Iraq. I'm not going to go over the first reaction of Trump to this, which is actually ridiculous. I don't know how important that is. I think what's much more important is what's happened inside of Iran as a result of the murder of Soleimani. Now we have to go back in politics a little. Earlier this year, and for some time, there have been increasing troubles for the Ayatollahs in Iran. The economic sanctions that we imposed were having the desired effect and were creating a conflict situation inside the country. And creating basically discord. There were protests, okay, in major cities over the economic situation. The Ayatollahs were not entirely able to cope with it. And the population, okay, of Iran was becoming very restive. And they were showing it with public protests. But now look what has happened. Look what has happened. General Soleimani, of course, was very much like their secretary of state, the head of the major intelligence agency of Iran, the top general of Iran, all rolled into one. And he is a national hero. Okay, and we murdered him. Well, Trump actually murdered him. And so now there is a reaction to this. Okay, and so I'm not going to read this article. We'll go over it in any detail. But it has a picture. Mourners attend a funeral ceremony of the Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and others who were killed in Iraq by a U.S. drone strike on January 6, 2020. Sorry, the drone strike, I guess, was what, on the 2nd? The funeral was on the 6th. And it was held all over Iran. Earlier today, but this is a visual of the funeral in Tehran, where it is said that 1 million people were in the streets. The population of Iran is 1/4 of the United States. So it's like 4 million people collected in Washington for the funeral. And there is some footage of the funeral, okay, in Avaz, where there appear to have been actually millions who were attending the funeral procession, okay, in Avaz. Supposedly a restive city, hardly a Suleiman stronghold. And this is what it looked like. And various people made comments like they had never seen anything like the sea of endless people packing the streets of Iran by 6 a.m. And Dr. Jennifer Cassidy of Oxford said, "This is a historic scene. Trump has united the country like never before. We're witnessing one of the most seismic moments in history." Well, I can't really comment on that. But the general statement, the general statement that this has brought, okay, the Iranians together in opposition to the United States is, I think, hardly disputable now. This has been the reaction to the murder. This is the first reaction. This is what we bought, okay, with that. We also bought all kinds of threats, okay, emerging from the Iranians about um, 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 having retaliation. Now, the general word we're hearing is that they're going to be very judicious about this. They'll pick their spots. They won't create a situation which will directly lead to a third world war, but they have vowed that they will make us pay. The leaders of the regime have vowed that they will make us pay. And we have made a martyr of Suleiman. By the way, Suleiman was honored as a martyr by being given certain awards, okay, in Iran, as if he was someone who was dead, because it's not the practice there to treat as a martyr someone who is still alive and still functioning. But way before his death, the people of Iran were giving Suleiman the honors of a martyr and were viewing him as such. And he in turn viewed things. He viewed himself as someone who could have no higher honor than to become a martyr for the revolution. And Donald Trump, of course, went ahead and obliged him and created him as a martyr. I don't know why my image has gone. Oh, I guess I do know now. It'll be back in just a minute. Things are a little delayed when I change the view sometimes, which I just did. But you should see me back full screen, okay, in just a second. So we made Soleiman a true martyr. And in making him a martyr, we united the people of Iran against us. That is what we did. We ensured that their resistance to our sanctions will be stronger than before. Their support for the regime there will be stronger than before. We have ensured that their resistance to us will be stronger than before. So what happens now? What happens now? Well, it's certain in my view that they will retaliate in certain ways as long as we are in Iraq, as long as we are in their general vicinity, including in Saudi. They will do the best that they can to revenge themselves against us, to pay us back for the martyrdom of Qasem Soleimani. They will do that. Hi, Rob. Hi, Cheyenne. They're grief-stricken and infuriated, and as Cheyenne says, that is an understatement for sure. It is an understatement for sure. They will respond. We can be sure. We can be sure of that. We can be sure they will respond. Now, Trump has said to them, if they respond, if there are any more attacks or any threats against the United States, that he's going to bomb 52 sites, including a number of cultural sites. So he is saying that he stands ready to commit 52 war crimes on Iran if they try to retaliate to his murder of Soleimani. I don't think he's going to deter them. Steve Wolfbrand says, probably not the best time to book a room in a Trump hotel. If I'm not mistaken, there is a Trump hotel in Turkey. I don't know if the Turks are going to keep track of Iranian nationals visiting Turkey at this point. I don't know if they're going to do that. They may, but who knows what the Turks are going to do. Cheyenne says, it's breaking my heart to see the troops on their way to death, and destruction. Well, my heart is breaking to see everybody on their way to death okay, and to destruction. So, what will we do? So Trump has announced that we're going to build up our nuclear arsenal after we turn down a landmark weapons treaty with Russia. Okay, I guess he got out of the treaty. So he's nixing the treaty and he's going to build up a nuclear arsenal. Yeah, he did this in 2018, as Steve has pointed out, okay, with a link. So this is part of his general buildup, his general attempt to show the rest of the world that he's the toughest guy on the block. There was someone else who acted in that way and who knew no limits. And his name was Adolf Hitler. And he tried to bully other nations in the same way Trump is trying to bully Iran right now. He would attack other nations and create considerable devastation, okay, in other nations. And then he would go to the other great powers and he would say, I don't want war. I want only peace. Please come, okay, and negotiate a peace with me. And a UK Prime Minister by the name of Neville Chamberlain went to negotiate peace with Hitler after Hitler had destroyed Czechoslovakia. And after a negotiation with Hitler, but Chamberlain returned to England carrying a piece of paper that said, we will have peace in our time. Shortly after that, of course, after negotiating peace in our time, what Hitler did was to divide up the nation of Poland between Germany and the Soviet Union. And this time, the Allies decided to stand up to him, and that was the beginning of the Second World War. The point, okay, I'm making here is that people who take balance of power politics to an extreme and who insist on total victory in balance of power politics, who know no limits, will eventually be stopped by other powers in the international system, will eventually be checked. Hitler got very, very far with what he did. And the German people either looked the other way or felt they had no choice in the matter. And they let him do what he wanted to do. And for a while, the other great powers allowed this, but eventually they had to stop it. Now, China is a nuclear power. Russia is a nuclear power. Both have ties to Iran. So does India have ties to Iran. Okay, and India is a nuclear power, currently friendly with the United States and Trump, but friendly with Iran too, and getting certain things it needs from Iran. Trump has been playing balance of power politics in the Middle East, not just Trump. We have been playing balance of power politics there really since the 1990s and before. But after the defeat of Iraq in the first Iraq War, we then tried to create a situation where we toppled the Saddam regime, okay, in Iraq, which we eventually did, using the pretext that they were somehow responsible for 9/11. And they had weapons of mass destruction as well. Neither of those things were true. Neither of those things were true. But we used them as an excuse to attack Iraq. And when we toppled the regime there, we tried to build up a regime that would be under our control and that would serve as a buffer between Iran, Saudi Arabia, other Gulf states that were allied with us, and Israel, that we have wanted so long to protect. So that was our approach. We were the great power. We were collecting states in the Middle East around us. We intervened in Syria. Why? Because Assad had fallen under the influence of both Russia and Iran. And he was allowing the Iranians to supply Shias in areas that were close to Israel, that were creating problems for Israel. Israel, of course, has been a client state of the United States since its founding in 1948. And considerations of domestic politics are very important here. For many years, the majority of Jews in America were very much in Israel's corner. Whatever they did was okay with Jewish people. But as time went on, and Jews saw the violations of the rights of Palestinians that were going on, there's been a shift of opinion within the Jewish community in the United States. And today, it's probably fair to say that a majority of Jews are in favor of constraining Israel in order to get it to respect the human rights of the Palestinians. and to create a solution to the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which allows for the coexistence of both sides. That's probably now the majority opinion among Jews. But meanwhile, over a period of time, the evangelical Christians, a very important part of the Republican Party, okay, and Republican power, of course, see the state of Israel as fulfilling a biblical prophecy. And they think it's up to them to deliver unwavering support to the foreign policy of Israel, because the continued existence of Israel fulfills a precondition for the second coming. So this then has created a situation where the political power of Israel vis-a-vis domestic politics in the United States is very, very strong. And both Democratic and Republican administrations have not dared for a long time to heavily oppose the foreign policies which the Israelis have chosen for themselves. And so we have the situation today where the Israeli dog, or the Israeli tail, has been wagging the U.S. dog for some time in foreign policy. Yes, we are the dog. Okay. They've been determining our foreign policy in the Middle East. And our policies with respect to Iran have not only been for the sake of trying to protect our Saudi client state, but our Israeli client state as well. And we have identified the interests of these states and mistaken them for our own interests inside of the Middle East. And we've been playing a balance of power game in that area to try to line up forces, both internal and external, to the various nations in such a way that we and our closest allies, the Israelis and the Saudis, hold the balance of power from the Mediterranean Sea to the borders of Iran. And we've been trying to create that as an entirely secure situation. This is what this whole thing has been about. The Iranians have been threatening that. The Quds Force was threatening that. The Shias were threatening that. Pompeo made a statement earlier today in which he referred to the development of a Shia crescent running from Lebanon through Syria to Iran and down south to Arabia, to the Houthis in Yemen, and to the Shia populations in Arabia. And he spoke of that crescent as encircling Israel and threatening the security, of Israel. And basically saying that it was in the interest of, and it was imperative, that we stop the formation of that crescent. So that is what Pompeo was assisting upon. And that gives you a hint to the thinking internally inside of the U.S. government. But what is the effect of the murder at this point? What is the effect of the murder? Well, the effect of the murder is to create a more unified Iran and to create a Russia that is increasingly alarmed, and what, in terms of what we're doing to Iran. And it has the effect of pushing Iran further into the arms of Russia, further into the arms, of China, and increases their influence in Iran and their influence in Syria, and creates a closer alliance in opposition to us in areas where the Russians can project their power in a way that they cannot project power into Latin America, for example, or even into Africa. But these Middle Eastern areas are fairly close to Russia, and they can project their considerable power there. Now, this is not the Russia of the 1990s, or the 1980s, or the 1970s. It's now a nation of, what is it, 140 million people, something like that, 145 million people. Back in the old days, the Soviet Union was a bloc of 300 million people, and we were much smaller, perhaps 200 million at that time. Now we're 330 million, and they're only 140 million. But they still have their nuclear arsenal, and they have advanced weapons, and they're technologically very sophisticated. And Putin is very clever and very strategic, and much smarter than Trump. Much, much, much smarter than Trump. And the Chinese have enormous capabilities too. They have to act at a distance, but they won't hesitate to act through the Russians or the Iranians to weaken us, because they have a vested interest in weakening us, in this area. But now we're in the process of getting ourselves thrown out of Iraq. And we're in the process, therefore, of weakening our hold on the Arab nations in Arabia that are allied with us. Because Iran is preparing to project its capabilities in its desire to retaliate against us. It will probably be victimizing those client states, of ours. If they touch Israel or try to touch Israel, then Israel will either retaliate or will launch a preventive war of its own, trusting that we will jump in to help them. So what has Trump created? He's created a much weakened situation for the United States. He is on the point of getting us either thrown out of Iraq or continuing to project our power in such a way there that it relies on us as basically a tyrant power that is governing Iraq and destroying the desires of the Iraqis to have their country back. In other words, as a foreign power sitting on a powder keg where the Iranians can continually stir up trouble instead of a solid block of nations that are opposed to Iran, which is what we've been trying to build now in that area for more than 20 years. What we have now is continuous threats to our own power in this area. Now, this might have been avoided if we had more competent people playing the balance of power game than we have now. That is very, very true. If we had people as skilled as the professionals within the Obama administration, we might be avoiding this total disaster now through withdrawals that are judicious from various parts of the area. We may have been more successful. But now this ham-handed approach of Trump is building up a unified Iran instead of an Iran that was emerging out of isolation and developing ties to the West through business and through trade. We have an Iran which is only looking now to its own internal security against the United States and to revenge against the United States for committing a war crime involving killing its major national hero. That's what we have. We now have the influence of the United States getting rolled back to the borders of Israel and to the borders, of Saudi and other client states, but within Arabia, completely dependent upon us. And we now have those states now vulnerable to increasingly capable armed attacks from Iran. That is the situation he has created. That is his terrible failure. It is situations like this that in previous live streams have made me afraid of the continued presence of Donald Trump in the presidency of the United States. My insistence that we couldn't just wait into the election. We had to get him out now because every day he's in there, he's a terrible danger. And we can see that now based on what has happened in Iraq. We can now clearly see what a danger he is. Now, there was no one in Latin America to oppose us to actually create a threat to us due to his foolish actions there. I mean, his actions towards Iran are not wholly different from his actions in relation to Venezuela. But Venezuela is not a country with the capability of Iran, or with the population size of Iran, or with the armed forces of Iran. I mean, we could essentially bully the Venezuelans make them suffer and not get a threat in return from them. They were not sufficiently powerful to do anything except suffer. And we have made them suffer. But the Iranians are not in that particular situation. They can make us suffer too and make our client states suffer as well. They're in a position to say, we will not be bullied without punishing you severely as well. You think you spent a lot of money in Iraq? You think you've lost a lot of people in Iraq? Wait until you continue to escalate in this mad manner against us. What Iraq will be is just, what it has been is just a cakewalk. It is not the kind of reality you will have to face here. We will have the Russians as our allies. We will have the Chinese as our allies. We will have weapons from them. And we have formidable weapons of our own. We are in a position to make you suffer. That's basically what they are telling us. That's what Trump has gotten us into. Now, before I end this, what I do want you to understand is that I am not advocating for balance of power politics. I have said that a more competent version of balance of power politics than Trump and his administration are practicing could have avoided this particular disaster, or any other disaster that would have actually put Iran in a much more commanding position than it is likely to be in the future. However, that doesn't mean I'm advocating for a balance of power style of foreign policy. Not at all. Instead, what I believe is that as fast as we can, we have to abandon balance of power politics in international relations and work in a collaborative way with other nations. I am convinced that that will be what Bernie Sanders does when he gets to the presidency. That's another reason why the establishment hates him so, because they know that of all the presidential candidates, he is the one most likely to run a collaborative foreign policy that will approach other nations with a desire to conclude deals with them that are mutually beneficial and that build up their nations and that provide them with creative autonomy and independence, and that respect their self-determination and their sovereignty. That's the kind of policy that I think Bernie Sanders is going to run. Now, I am not saying that this is going to involve us giving up our power in some way. There is always power in politics. There is no way to avoid that. Politics is about power. But you can construct power arrangements that are collaborative and that are creative and that are good for the vast majority of participants. And for the majority of nations, you can create a collaborative foreign policy based on a Green New Deal for all, for everyone, that can both save the earth and create a much more peaceful regime in foreign policy. We don't have to accede to the short run realism of balance of power politics, which has dominated our foreign policy for most of the post war period. Certainly since the bipolar conflict with the Soviet Union, then even going through the Carter administration, but there was some interruptions there with Carter trying to make some new departures in foreign policy. They did not succeed, okay, for a variety of reasons. It's hard for people who've been trained in one style of politics, in balance of power politics, educated that way in the universities, brought up that way for years and years and years, experienced that way in diplomatic circles and foreign policy circles. It's hard for people like that to learn to practice politics in a way that doesn't emphasize power for the sake, okay, of power. It's hard for that to happen. It takes a change in regime. I think Bernie Sanders is going to try to bring that kind of change to the world as part of his presidency. So that's the kind of foreign policy that I favor. But right now, we have another total failure of balance of power politics shaping up in the Middle East, entering an extremely dangerous and risky time, where the attempts by the powers that be in the Middle East to continue to play balance of power politics will expose us all to risk. That is the time we are entering. We can de-escalate that perhaps through the immediate impeachment of Donald Trump, through getting him out of there. Now, I'm not looking at Pence as a peaceful man, but I don't think Pence is a rash one. I think his political career demonstrates that he is rigid, he is conservative, but he goes along with others in his group as part of a group. And some of them will recognize the risks and the dangers in the type of foreign policy this administration, under the direction of Donald Trump, has been following. So yes, Pence would practice continuing balance of power politics. But now that the situation is so dangerous, I think he will probably withdraw to a safer distance and refrain from trying to mix it up with the Iranians. And by the way, if I were the nations of Western Europe right now, and I were part of the EU, I would want to break the sanctions against Iraq right now. I'm sorry, the sanctions against Iran right now, and beg the Iranians to come back to the table in relation to the nuclear deal and keep the nuclear deal in return for a complete abrogation of the sanctions. The Europeans have it within their power to tell Trump and to tell the United States, you will not dictate our trading policies with Iran. We are tired of losing money. We are tired of losing benefit. We are tired of following your foreign policy here and making them suffer. If they are willing to be a peaceful nation and to refrain from the development of nuclear weapons, and they agree to comply with this treaty again, we will comply with it too and no longer exercise any sanctions against them. And if you don't like that, it's too bad for you. But we're going to trade with them. We're going to break your grip on them. We're going to allow them access to medicines and the other things they need. And you're not going to control our foreign policy to them anymore. In my view, that's the best thing the Europeans could do for us. For us. It's the best thing the Europeans could do to de-escalate the situation which has developed in Iran and in Iraq and in the Middle East. If the Europeans want peace in the Middle East, the best way to get that is to bring Iran into the economic sphere of Europe so that they can rely on European trade as well as on trade with Russia, and China. Make it so they don't require trade with the United States to achieve prosperity in Iran. The Ayatollahs will go for that. Yes, there will still be retaliation against us in the Middle East until they're satisfied that they've gained a sufficient degree of revenge against us for this war crime. But I don't think the Europeans should any longer be part of our sanctions regime against them. I think that will be good for Iraq, and I think it will be more in the interest of the United States than anything that Donald Trump will do or is capable of doing. So, that's my piece for tonight. I'm now going to look at your comments. I am already looking at your comments. And I think I have a huge number of comments tonight. 56 comments. Okay, I haven't even looked at. Cheyenne says, sanctions a slow motion war. Kay says, I like Hedges. He has some good videos online. Yep, I love Chris Hedges. He's often right on. Hedges says, sanctions are acts of war. I agree with him. Sanctions are the empire's way to control the world. Yes, I agree with him too. And by the way, we never envisioned, the American people, never envisioned becoming an imperial power. I don't think we understand as a people that that is what we have done. And I don't think we would be happy with having done that if we can make it clear to the American people that that is what we are and that is what has happened. I don't think we ever wanted to become the new Romans, which is basically what we're becoming. Steve says sanctions only hurt the poor. The rich will always live well. Richard gives individuals take on Iran. Well, Richard, what is their take on Iran? I'm sure it's constructive. Well, let me scroll up, folks. Yes, it's very necessary to completely transform our foreign policy. Again, that is something I think Bernie's going to do. Shine says, no, I came back to Bali, but I'm too sick to enjoy it like I used to. But the people in villages are very sweet and friendly, just extremely busy trying to survive. And Barbara says, I'm here too. Uh, and Evelina says, collaborative foreign policy. I think for us, okay, collaborative foreign policy involves fair trade, okay, with other nations. Okay, it involves offering other nations constructive help with them in control of how they take the help and what they do with it. We have to be in a giving position. Okay, says it's always the givers that get the shaft. Sadly, Cheyenne says, Kay, I lived in Mexico for 4 months years ago. I loved it there. That was getting too expensive. Most of my money has always gone to my humanitarian work. I never anticipated getting sick. Most of us don't anticipate getting sick. It's not what we count on. Steve says America is a bully. This is where do you go? Can you tag us with the fundraiser? We can at least share it. Are you in Mexico, Cheyenne? Evelina says, think about it. How many countries are necessarily yearning for friendly relations with the United States? Probably a lot of countries in Latin America are yearning for friendly, collaborative relations with the United States rather than the dominating relationships that we have with people in the Western Hemisphere right now. The closest thing to friendly relations we have, really friendly relations, truly friendly relations, is probably with the Canadians. Even there, we dominate more than we should. But with respect to the other nations of Latin America, I mean, forget about it. We're always trying to dominate not only their foreign policies, but their domestic policies as well to make those countries safe for our multinational corporations. It's imperialism. We've been developing and strengthening imperial relations with them again, certainly since the 1970s. Cheyenne says, Kay, I've already left. I've been sick and broke because I couldn't work. Took some time to save money I get from disability for a one-way ticket, but I'm still sick and broke. I could be deported in July if I don't get help with my fundraiser. Oh, gee, that's terrible. So, Kay, please give the details. I don't mean Kay. Cheyenne, please give details, okay, of your fundraiser so people here can help. Yeah, I think Bernie's going to win too. Again, lots of comments. I can't go over them all. Yeah, please put up details, Cheyenne. Rich says, you mean we haven't overturned or killed a U.S. possible supporter in South America? Yes, we have. We haven't given people a chance to become supporters. Okay, that would be positive. I mean, I think Venezuela for years was would have been happy to develop friendly relations with the United States if only we would have stayed out of their internal affairs. But no, we wouldn't have that. The New Romans crucifying Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning too, of course. Kay says the War Machine stocks went way up after this happened too. Yeah, but that was just a momentary reaction. We don't know what the long term is going to be on this. It's very much going to be, I think, on what happens to Trump and what he does and what his successor does in the presidency. Kay says Bernie is the only hope for us and the world too. He may well be. Ah, so Cheyenne is at fundraise.com and put in her name. Cheyenne Tierra, Tiera. Okay, sorry not to be talking here. I've been trying to refresh my screen, and it's been taking some time. My computer is not responding very rapidly at this point. Okay, I'll wait for a few more comments, but if those are not forthcoming, I'm going to say good night. It's the witching hour for me. And thank you very much for coming. I hope you liked this stream. Okay, if you like it, please like, share, and subscribe. And please don't forget my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And please help also Cheyenne with a fundraiser. Which is very, very important. So thank you all for coming and for participating and for conversing. And I'll see you tomorrow night. And I hope I'll have better news then. And I hope I'll have some more hopeful things to talk about, okay, at that time. There have been some new comments. I'm trying to get a look at them right now. Steve says, good night, friends. Richard, I'm sorry, Rick says night all, and Kay says, yes, it is. I've always helped everyone I could when I was able. Now that I need help, they are gone. Ah, yes. Okay, good luck, everybody. Maybe I should start saying good night and good luck. I think we all need some good luck. Jim Bird, Kay, and Margaret Ames have joined. And thank you for joining. Unfortunately, we're about to leave. I'll see you tomorrow night at between 9 and 9:15. One of these nights, I will try to make it, okay, by 9 o'clock. Anyway, have a wonderful evening and a wonderful day tomorrow.